Okay, imagine this. What if we could control light? Like really control it? Not just dimming a switch, but making light and matter interact in totally new ways.
Yeah, ways that could lead to things like super fast computing or maybe communications that are impossible to hack.
It sounds pretty futuristic, right?
But that's kind of what we're digging into today. There's some really fascinating research out of Rice University.
Exactly. We're doing a deep dive into a study. It was published in Nature Communications where they've achieved this unprecedented level of control over how light and matter interact.
So our mission today is basically to unpack that. How does it work? What's the big breakthrough? And, why should we care? What could it mean for the future?
Right. We'll try to break down the key ideas, keep it clear without getting too lost in the technical weeds.
Okay, let's do it. So the core piece of tech here is something called a 3D photonic crystal cavity. Sounds complicated. It is quite sophisticated, but one of the researchers, Fuyang Te, gave a pretty good analogy. Think of a room, but every single surface, walls, ceiling, floor is a perfect mirror.
Ah, okay. So if you turn on a light inside.
It just bounces around, right?
Huh?
Trapped. This cavity does something similar, but in a much more controlled way. It traps light photons and makes them ricochet in very specific engineered patterns.
And why trap light like that? What's the point?
Well, the big advantage is it dramatically increases the chances for the photons to interact with matter. In this case, they used electrons.
Right. You need that interaction for a lot of next-gen tech, I guess.
Absolutely. Enhanced light-matter interaction is fundamental. And while we've had ways to trap light before, often simpler, like 1D setups, this 3D structure is way more complex.
Which allows for more control.
Precisely. That complexity is key to what they achieved.
So they built this fancy 3D light box. What experiment do they actually run with it?
Okay, so they looked at what happens when you have multiple trapped light patterns. These are called cavity modes interacting all at the same time with a really thin sheet of electrons.
Electrons just moving freely?
Free-moving electrons, but under specific conditions, inside a strong magnetic field and at very cold temperatures. Fuyang Te and Ali Mujibur were key people involved in setting this up.
And this is where strong coupling comes in.
Yeah.
I read something about that, creating hybrid light matter things. Polaritons.
You got it. Polaritons. See, electrons, they naturally interact strongly with each other, but photons, usually they just pass right through each other.
Right. Light beams don't typically collide.
Exactly. But this cavity, it confines the light so well that the electromagnetic fields become incredibly intense. That intensity forces a strong interaction, a strong coupling between the light and the electrons.
And that creates the polaritons, these hybrid particles.
Yes. They're part light, part matter. And the exciting thing about polaritons is they give us a way to manipulate light properties on really tiny scales. Could be huge for quantum computing, maybe faster, more energy-efficient processors, and for quantum communication, too.
Okay, strong coupling sounds pretty significant, but then they mentioned ultra-strong coupling. That sounds like cranking it up even further.
It is. It's another level entirely. In the ultra-strong coupling regime, the energy swapping back and forth between the light and the electrons happens incredibly fast. So fast, it actually becomes kind of resistant to losing energy, to dissipation.
Wow.
Fuyang Te called it a really deep, kind of unusual hybridization. Light and matter become almost fused in their behavior.
How do you even see that happening? It sounds incredibly fleeting and delicate.
They used terahertz radiation. It's a specific frequency of light that's really good for probing these ultra-fast quantum interactions happening inside the cavity.
And this is all under those extreme conditions you mentioned. Cold temperatures, strong magnets.
Yep. You need that very controlled, very cold, high magnetic field environment to even get these quantum effects to appear reliably and be studied. It's tricky work.
Okay, and one of the really key findings you mentioned had to do with polarization. The orientation of the light.
Right. This was fascinating. They discovered that how the different light patterns, the modes, interacted with the electrons in this ultra-strong state depended heavily on the polarization of the light they sent in.
So depending on how the light wave was angled, I guess?
Sort of, yeah. It's orientation. Depending on that, the different light modes inside the cavity could either stay separate and do their own thing, or they could actually mix together, forming totally new hybrid light modes.
Huh. So the polarization acts like a switch.
In a way, Te actually described it like the different light modes were talking to each other, but using the electrons in the magnetic field as intermediaries.
Light modes talking via electrons. That's wild.
It leads to these new correlated quantum states. The electrons are enabling a conversation between different forms of light, essentially.
Wow. Okay, and that led to the big surprise, the aha moment you hinted at, this idea of matter helping photons interact.
Exactly. That was the unexpected kicker. Their main goal initially was just using the 3D cavity to boost the light-matter interaction itself, get that strong, maybe ultra-strong coupling.
Standard procedure, maybe, pushing the known limits.
Kind of. But then they realized, hang on, this setup doesn't just make light talk to matter better. It could actually let photons influence other photons, which they normally don't do.
Through the electrons again.
Yes, indirectly via the electrons. Andre Baden, another author, really emphasized this point. He said this discovery opens up potentially brand new ways to think about quantum computation algorithms, new protocols for quantum communication.
It's like finding a hidden feature. The electrons are like a switchboard operator connecting calls between photons.
That's a great way to put it, a hidden switchboard. It allows photons to have an effect on each other in ways we haven't really harnessed before.
And this wasn't just a theory. They had simulations that matched what they saw in the lab.
They did. Alessandra Alabastri worked with Stephen Sanders to build a really detailed computer model of the cavity.
Okay.
And their simulations managed to replicate the electromagnetic behavior and the material properties they were observing experimentally. It gave them confidence that their interpretation was right.
Always good when the theory and experiment line up.
Definitely. Alabastri even mentioned how helpful it was that Fuyang He was so engaged with the simulation side, too. It highlights how important that back and forth between experiment and theory is in modern science.
So let's zoom out. What's the real significance here? Why is this getting people excited?
Well, fundamentally, it's a completely new tool, a new way to engineer interactions at the quantum level. Not just light matter, but now, unexpectedly, this mediated photon interaction, too.
Right.
Junichi Kirakono, who led the research team, made a really good point. He said, quantum phenomena are usually incredibly fragile. They fall apart easily.
Yeah, quantum computing is notoriously difficult because of that. Decoherence and all that.
Exactly. But this field, cavity quantum electrodynamics, using these sophisticated cavities, it gives you a protected environment, a way to shield and control these delicate quantum states.
So this could help make quantum tech more robust.
That's the hope. It could pave the way for maybe truly hyper-efficient quantum processors or much faster ways to send data securely, even developing new kinds of sensors with unbelievable sensitivity.
Okay, amazing potential. And we should probably mention the folks who funded this work. It takes resources to do this kind of cutting-edge research.
Absolutely. The paper acknowledges support from the U.S. Army Research Office, the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation, the W.M. Keck Foundation, and the Robert A. Welch Foundation. Important to note, of course, the views are the authors, not necessarily the funders.
Right. And for anyone wanting the source, it's in Nature Communications titled Multimode Ultrastrong Coupling in Three-Dimensional Photonic-Crystal Cavities. We can put the DOI link somewhere, too.
It's a landmark paper, for sure, a real step forward in manipulating the quantum world.
So for everyone listening, the big takeaway is this awesome new 3D structure, this photonic cavity, that gives scientists incredible control over light. And the surprise bonus, finding out it can make light particles interact indirectly through matter.
Which really opens up a whole new playground for quantum technologies.
Definitely. So here's something to chew on.
Yeah.
Given that we can now sort of nudge light and matter to interact in these new controlled ways, and even get light to influence other light, what kinds of technologies, things we maybe can't even probably imagine yet, might spring from this down the road?
Yeah, think about it. Beyond faster computers or secure messages, what about sensing? Or manipulating chemical reactions, or something else entirely? It's a really exciting time for this area of physics.